Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain The Gangster, the Cop, the Devil. This movie tells the story of a gangster boss who works with a police officer to uncover the truth about a serial murder case. Will the case can be solved? Let's find out further in The Gangster, the Cop, the Devil.
끝은 봐야지.
The Gangster, the Cop, the Devil begins by showing the city streets at night, which are already very quiet. A white sedan suddenly accelerated and followed a black sedan in front of him on the street. At an intersection, the white car accidentally hit the car in front of it so that the driver in the black sedan got out of his car. The man then took a photo of the damaged part of his car so that it could be used to make an insurance claim. But another man driving a white sedan suddenly got out and stabbed the man with a knife from behind. The other man then stabbed the man repeatedly until he died. The next day, a male police officer named Jung Tae-seok came to the scene of the murder to investigate. Detective Tae-seok took several photos of the damaged part of the car and several photos of the victim. After examining it, he brought the documentary evidence to the police station to be reported to the police chief at a later meeting. On the other hand, a gangster boss named Jang Dong-su is having a meeting with another gangster boss named Hyo Sang-doo. They are both gangster bosses of the two most powerful gangster groups in Korea. At the meeting, Sang-doo and Dong-suk discuss the division of assets and territories between their groups. Sang-doo's gangster group already has a larger territory than Dong-suk's. Seeing Sang-doo's greed, Dong-suk's subordinates were annoyed and made a bit of a fuss in the place. Fortunately, Dong-suk could control his men and warn them with a little lesson.
아유, 이 새끼 봐라 이거.
Meanwhile, Detective Tae-seok, who is currently discussing the case with the police chief and several other detectives, said that the murder case that occurred in the sedan yesterday was a serial murder case. However, the chief of police and other detectives thought that this conclusion was just a hoax because there was still not enough evidence. The police chief even thinks that Detective Tae-seok considers this case a big case because he wants to get a promotion.
승진하고 싶어서 그러냐?
제가 승진하고 싶어서요, 승진.
That night after Dong-suk attends a meeting with Sang-doo, he decides to drive home alone without an escort from his subordinates. In the middle of the trip, when Dong-suk was driving while calling someone, suddenly a sedan crashed into his car from behind.
걱정하지 마시고.
Later, he came down to check the condition of the car. Seeing that the damage to his car wasn't too bad, he decided to forgive the driver and won't ask for compensation. But when he was about to get back into his car, the man instead attacked him with a knife. Dong-suk tries to put up a fight and counterattack the man. Unfortunately, the man managed to escape using his car after hitting Dong-suk until he passed out. Dong-suk was then immediately rushed to the hospital for treatment because his injuries were quite severe. All of Dong-suk's men thought that the attack was the work of Sang-doo's gangster group, so they immediately came to Sang-doo Group's headquarters and immediately attacked all of Sang-doo's men. The suspicion arose because the attack on Dong-suk occurred after he met Sang-doo. That night, all of Dong-suk's men immediately beat up all of Sang-doo's men who didn't have any preparations. As a result, most of Sang-doo's men were seriously injured and had to be rushed to the hospital. A few days later, Dong-suk finally recovered and came to his senses. He then said that the perpetrators of the attack on him were not Sang-doo's gangster group. Dong-suk feels that Sang-doo has no motive whatsoever to carry out the attack. Not long after, Detective Tae-seok came and visited Dong-suk to ask some questions regarding the chronology of the attack that night.
아이고, 죄송합니다.
Hearing the chronological explanation from Dong-suk, Detective Tae-seok becomes increasingly convinced that this case is a serial murder case and the culprit is a crazy psychopath, because the incident experienced by Dong-suk is the same as the murder incident that occurred a few days ago. After that, Detective Tae-seok checks Dong-suk's car to gather more information. After matching the crash marks from Dong-suk's car with the crash marks that occurred in the murder case a few days ago, it turns out that the scratches are the same. He immediately took a photo of the scratch as evidence documentation. Not long after, Sang-doo came to visit Dong-suk to protest because his men had beaten Sang-doo's men. As a consequence of the peace agreement they had made, Dong-suk had to hand over part of his territory to Sang-doo and pay the entire hospital fee of his men. Dong-suk then agrees to pay all the hospital fees for Sang-doo's men as a form of responsibility for the attacks carried out by his subordinates. The next day, Detective Tae-seok tries to convince the police chief that all recent murder cases involving car vandalism are connected. Detective Tae-seok requests that his team be allowed to investigate this case, but the police chief scolds him and asks him not to get involved in this case.
너 경고하는데 끼어들지 마. 나가.
The following day, the psychopath who often committed murder recently returned to action. The psychopath seems to be a very cruel and heartless person. He doesn't hesitate to kill other people to get what he wants. That night, the psychopath kills a truck driver so he can steal the truck. On the other hand, Dong-seok hires a sketch painter to sketch the psychopath's face based on the traits he remembers at the time of the assault. After the sketch is complete, Dong-seok orders his men to find the psychopath before the police find him. The scene returns to the psychopath who has now stolen the truck belonging to the old man he killed earlier. When the psychopath drove the truck, it turned out that there were still other people in the truck, so the psychopath killed the person immediately. The knife used by the psychopath had fallen and was left at the scene. The next day, all the businessmen who previously worked with Dong-seok switched to working with Sang-doo. This is because Dong-seok's gangster reputation has now been damaged due to an attack carried out unilaterally by him. All investors who previously worked with Dong-seok to build the casino also withdrew all their capital. That night, Dong-seok has managed to find a knife in a truck left by a psychopath at the scene of last night's murder. Dong-seok then contacts Detective Tae-seok to inform him that he has now found evidence of the psychopathic murder case they are looking for. Hearing this, Detective Tae-seok immediately met Dong-seok to make an agreement and cooperation to catch the psychopath. In the agreement, if the police catch the psychopath first, the perpetrator will be in prison, but if Dong-seok catches the psychopath first, he will kill the psychopath. The next day, Detective Tae-seok makes a small team to solve this case based on all the evidence Dong-seok has provided, such as facial sketches and a white sedan used by a psychopath. Detective Tae-seok also asked his co-worker, Cha Soo-jin, who is a forensics expert, to examine all the evidence he had obtained. Dong-seok acted unilaterally in the middle of the investigation process without Detective Tae-seok's knowledge. He orders his men to use a psychopath's knife to kill Sang-doo. After Dong-seok kills Sang-doo, he deliberately leaves the knife in Sang-doo's body so that the police think that the person who killed Sang-doo is a psychopath. Detective Tae-seok, who knew about it, was very upset and immediately beat Dong-seok. Detective Tae-seok was annoyed because the evidence of the knife weapon that was previously given to him was handed over for free by Dong-seok to the police. The fight between Detective Tae-seok and Dong-seok is short because Dong-seok can easily defeat Tae-seok. Dong-seok then explained why he did all that to Detective Tae-seok. With Sang-doo's death by a psychopath's knife, the police will be increasingly convinced that this murder case is a serial murder case. Then the news about the psychopathic murder of the most powerful gangster boss will go viral in various media so that the head of the Central Police will pay more attention to this case. When the Central Police asked the police chief led by Tae-seok to investigate this case further, the police chief did not involve Tae-seok's team of detectives in this case. This makes Tae-seok feel annoyed and frustrated because his team has been struggling to collect evidence all this time. In the evening, Dong-seok goes to attend Sang-doo's funeral. Unbeknownst to Dong-seok, the real psychopath was also present at the funeral. The psychopath is angry that someone used his knife to kill Sang-doo when he wasn't the one who did the murder. The psychopath then gives a piece of paper to Sang-doo's men while looking at Dong-seok. The paper contains a message saying that someone else has used his knife to kill Sang-doo. That night, the psychopath committed another murder in the same way, namely by crashing the victim's car from behind. The next day, Dong-seok and Detective Tae-seok again investigate the psychopath's sedan to find more evidence. After a thorough inspection, they finally found a bloodstain on the sedan's steering wheel, but moments later, Sang-doo's men suddenly appeared and immediately attacked them. The fight between Sang-doo's men and Dong-seok's men finally happened again. Dong-seok and Detective Tae-seok were also seriously injured in the fight, but they managed to survive. After that, Dong-seok and Detective Tae-seok bury the bodies of Sang-doo's dead men. The next day, Detective Tae-seok gets an assignment from the police chief to solve a kidnapping case. He immediately asks his team to investigate the kidnapping case even though he wants to focus on solving serial murder cases with Dong-seok. The next day, when Detective Tae-seok's team was following the victim who was about to give a ransom to the kidnappers, they almost caught the perpetrator, but the attempt failed. The only clue Detective Tae-seok's team has is a bottle of soju that was previously used by the kidnappers. After being investigated by the forensic team, it turned out that the fingerprints of the kidnappers were the same as those found on the steering wheel of a psychopath's car. After receiving information about the psychopath's data, Detective Tae-seok immediately came to the psychopath's house. Unfortunately, the psychopath was not at home and had been gone for more than 3 months. In the psychopath's room, Detective Tae-seok finally finds a photo of a psychopath similar to the facial sketch he had received from Dong-suk. The psychopath's name is Jung-ho. After that, Detective Tae-seok contacts Dong-suk to search for the psychopath Jung-ho. Dong-suk's men conduct searches at various hotels, inns, and nightclubs. However, the search effort was still not getting results. One day when Dong-suk was about to cross the street, he gave his umbrella to a high school girl who was in the rain.
이거 가져가.
괜찮아요.
가져가.
네. 감사합니다.
Detective Tae-seok, who saw this, reminded the girl not to easily accept things from strangers. Dong-suk and his men and Detective Tae-seok team have dinner at a restaurant. Suddenly, a news about the murder of a high school girl appeared on television. Dong-suk, who recognizes the umbrella that was found with the high school girl's body, feels very angry because the girl is the girl he has previously helped. Dong-suk immediately orders his men and Detective Tae-seok's team to investigate all areas near the high school girl's murder. In the end, they manage to find an inn of the psychopath Jung-ho. At night, they spy on the activity of the psychopath and pursue him. Although Dong-suk managed to crash into the psychopath's car, unfortunately, he had already fled. All of Dong-suk's men immediately ran to find the psychopath. After one of Dong-suk's subordinates was stabbed by the psychopath, Dong-suk tried to find the psychopath's whereabouts by following the traces of his blood. The drops of blood led Dong-suk to a karaoke place and finally, he managed to find the psychopath. Dong-suk, who feels very angry with the psychopath, decides not to kill him right away but chooses to beat him over and over again. Detective Tae-seok suddenly appeared during the execution and immediately bumped into Dong-suk and took the psychopath to the police station. The next day, many reporters gathered in front of the police station because they wanted to cover the arrest of the psychopath. At the time of interrogation, the psychopath slyly said that there was no direct evidence to prove that he was the perpetrator of the serial killer. Detective Tae-seok cannot use the previous evidence because it will reveal the cooperation between him and the gangsters. This condition frustrated Detective Tae-seok. At the time of the trial in court, the psychopath was able to state more accurate arguments than the evidence held by the police so that he could be acquitted of all charges. But in the middle of the trial, Dong-suk suddenly appears and testifies before the judge. Dong-suk is the only witness who managed to survive the murder committed by the psychopath. Dong-suk tells in detail about his fight at the attack that the psychopath had done. He proved that the psychopath was a serial killer based on the scar on his left chest and matching handwriting. So the judge decided that the psychopath was guilty of all serial murder cases that had occurred recently and sentenced him to death. The film closes with a scene where Dong-suk comes to the prison escorted by the police. It turns out that previously, Dong-suk and Tae-seok had agreed that Dong-suk would be the one who would execute the psychopath. This film teaches us a lot to always be careful and alert to any evil that may be stalking us, especially when we travel alone at night.